Welcome into my video, and today we're going to be talking about expanding. We're going to be talking about expanding in regards to what's most right for self. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. For any of you returning viewers, welcome to you as well. Just only thing I ask of you is if you could like and or comment or subscribe to show some support. And if you support real, and if you support what's real, I think I'll see that you will do so. And just because there's a balance there, I've supported and I've shown support for what I view as being real, and if it is right for you, then just do what you can in order to restore that balance. When it comes to expanding in regards to what is right for oneself, we just had the sun go right behind the cloud. This is why the image that we're streaming right now is pretty good. In a second here, like right now, the sun is going to block out my view of what I'm looking at. But in other words, and in any circumstance, we're going to continue on talking about expanding. And this is going to be expanding, and I'm going to be teaching about expanding and what I know about expanding when it comes to mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and why I think that you should be expanding when it comes to emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Expanding has to do with something growing, something, going onto a path, or maybe you could say expanding has to do with gaining mental clarity. You could say expanding has to do with gaining more mental strength, more mental knowledge, more mental wisdom. You could say that expanding physically could be materializing more things, expanding in a way physically that is right for yourself, or that is deemed right for you when it comes to your physical state of being. Expanding can be emotionally, it can be becoming more emotionally mature, becoming more emotionally grown, more emotionally strong, more emotionally stable, whatever that may be when it comes to what you view as expanding, what you view as your plan for expanding when it comes to your emotional state of being. Expanding spiritually is growing wiser. It's gaining knowledge and wisdom out of your experiences and really growing as a spirit and learning as a spirit, that you are always expanding as long as you are on that right path that is right for you, that is right for your state of being. Damn, I just spilled some water. Anyways, it's not really that big of a deal. It'll cool me down a little bit. It is what it is. But when it comes to expanding, when it comes to mentally, I could have, allowed me spilling that water on my shirt, or whatever that may be, hurt me or hinder me when it comes to mentally. Make me start to think, oh, people that are viewing this are going to think certain things about that action, or whatever that may be. But at the end of the day, I'm expanding beyond that point to where I don't really care about that. I'm not really mentally focused on that, and I'm not going to give that any mental superiority over my mental state of being, so it's not going to matter to me. So I'm obviously expanding from that. Physically, I could have ran into the other room and grabbed a new shirt. Preferably it would have been a white t-shirt just like this one. But at the end of the day, all that has happened is water got on there. Physically, water has never hurt anyone, of course, by spilling it on a t-shirt. So expanding past that, expanding past giving that any, giving that physical circumstance any authority over my state of being is not what I'm allowing it to do. Emotionally, I'm expanding because I'm not going to react to that in a way that is emotionally immature, emotionally weak, and saying, oh, I don't feel good, that's embarrassing, that sucks for people now, they're gonna see this, that I spilled water on my shirt. At the end of the day, who cares really? At the end of the day, I'm doing what's real, and my real actions are going to protect my emotional state of being throughout anything, throughout any judgment of others, throughout me feeling any type of insecurity, whatever that may be. Me being real and me expanding beyond that point of giving that any power over my state of being is where my true power aligns when it comes to expanding just across this situation. I know we're hyper fixated on what this situation that just happened, But then spiritually, I'm expanding beyond this because I'm seeing far beyond the physical, and I'm continuing to carry out my spiritual path, my spiritual purpose, and my purpose today, which is talking about expanding. When we talk about mentally expanding, we want to think, how can I best grow from or expand from these mental forms, these mental patterns that I'm either stuck in, that I'm experiencing a lot, or that I can't get away from, or whatever that may be. And how can I move into a more detached mental state of being from those specific thoughts, from those specific mental patterns that you're experiencing. So expanding beyond that mentally can be anything. You guys can take me, for example. Last night, I dropped a video talking about the alignments that we experience in the sky. It was, and it still currently is, the sun in Libra. If you're not familiar with astrology, that means the sun is in the sign of Libra and the Taurus moon, which means that the moon is in the sign of Taurus. I talked about the astrology and the astrological alignments last night. Of course, I didn't touch much specifically about the sun being in Libra, but I did talk about on my emotional state. And last night, that video was about breaking down being aware in that energy that we were experiencing. Not necessarily just breaking down the alignments, but breaking down a specific topic while being in those energies that we were all experiencing at that time, and that we were all still, experiencing in this time. And so what's the point? Well, the point is I expanded in the part where I talked about the Taurus moon, and if you guys want any information and how to, let's say, use that energy of Taurus moon, we'll look at the emotional segment of last night's video, of the video that I just posted most recently aside from this one, and check it out and see what you can gain from that. If you have anything to add, go ahead and add your perspective to it. Add your mental, your physical, emotional, and spiritual perspective to what I have had to say. Therefore, each one can teach one and each one can learn. But like I said, what I'm trying to discuss right now is that was me expanding. That was me expanding when it comes to mentally. I have never made a title where it happens to be a title of the alignments that we're experiencing. So therefore, I'm already putting myself in a mental state of being that is in resonation with expanding, that is resonating with that expanding energy, because previously, and I have talked about astrology on the channel once before last night, and I think I've referenced it before, but you can say that the mental state of being can relate to the air element in astrology. You can say that the physical state of being can relate to the earth element in astrology. The emotional state of being relating to either the fire or the water. Interchangeably, you can use that as the feeler sign or the feeling element of in astrology. And therefore leaving the spiritual state of being. That can correlate to, you could correlate it to water primarily because earth was something that came from water. So on this planet that we exist on, there was water before there was earth. So almost as if the spiritual essence is more tapped into the water, but also I think, and I'd say that you can correlate fire and water to the spiritual states of being. I will, in everything else that has to do with those elements and whatever it may be. And I will have a video on breaking that down more if you think that that is not true, if you think that I'm just blowing smoke right now. That's not what I'm doing. I'm talking real facts and real correlations. So anyways, off of this tangent, last night I was expanding when it comes to mentally. That expansion mentally was something that is helping me expand when it comes to mentally. I'm not focused on the downsides of expanding when something happens to be expanding mentally in that nature. Oh, I could sit here and I could think, how are other people going to think about me? What are other people going to think about this? When at the end of the day, I'm expanding mentally for myself. I know that I'm doing that through my mental state of being, and that that's going to benefit my mental state of being regardless of what happens. So regardless of, oh, what are people going to think about me? No, regardless, I'm continuing on mentally expanding. Regardless of physically, will people watch this video? Do I get views on this video? Do I get into the algorithm? Physically, do I see the manifestation from what I'm talking about? Regardless of that, I'm going to continue pushing on and expanding when it comes to mentally. And that's outside of, and not even taking into context, what I see physically. I'm going to continue on expanding mentally when it comes to emotionally. How did that make me feel? Of course, there was some, as if there always will be, that you have to deal with, some resistance, some reluctancy to not care necessarily, or to emotionally move on from, okay, and to mentally continue on expanding and doing these topics and learning how to use my mental state of being and more, let's say, practices, spiritual systems, whatever that may be. When referencing my talk of astrology in my previous video, it means that regardless of how I feel about that, or what other people may feel about, oh, you're talking about astrology, this makes you this makes you that, I feel this about you doing that. No, none of that really matters, because at the end of the day, I'm realizing I'm mentally expanding, and that's where my power lies. Regardless of, oh, what other people feel like, what I feel like. Of course, there's going to be that resistance, but you have to just get over that resistance, and that can be anything: emotional baggage, emotional insecurity, whatever that is that's holding you back. But realizing that I'm going to keep expanding mentally. I'm not going to allow the emotional state of being, emotional reactions of me or other people around me or places or things around me to affect my expansion when it comes to mentally. I'm not going to allow that to have any superiority or any influence over impacting my mental expansion. And now spiritually, I could sit here and I could say, oh, people are going to spiritually view me in this way, I'm going to be spiritually attacked in that way, whatever that may be. None of that really matters, because I know that I'm being real for myself. I know that I'm mentally expanding on real topics, on things that are real and on things that are in reality, aside from what other people are going to say and use their spirit nature or their nature in general to cast judgment amongst myself. I'm going to be stronger than that and realize that in lies my being protected is the fact that I'm benefiting from mentally expanding. So that's protecting my mental state of being. That's making sure that I'm constantly expanding when it comes to mentally. And that's just an example that I can give you guys on mentally expanding. You could be expanding from thought forms, you could be detaching from thought forms to attach to new, more beneficial thought forms, whatever that may be. Mentally expanding, you could be leaving stuff behind in the past and moving towards other things, towards the present and the future state. You could be expanding mentally by growing your mind, by becoming more sharper intellectually, by becoming more sound when it comes to mentally, by becoming more mental clairvoyant, having more mental clarity when it comes to your expansion mentally. And I'd suggest this for people to expand when it comes to mentally, in order for you to not be stagnant, for you to not be constantly in that same mental patterns, the same stuck mental patterns that you're possibly in. I would consider, and I would not just consider, but I would work in the energies of mentally expanding in order to help benefit one's state of being. So whatever it may be that you're trying to expand when it comes to mentally, your mental state of being can be expanded, and you can continue on expanding that mental state of being. Like I said, regardless of what's going on, regardless of what you're dealing with, in any terms of mental reality, physical, emotional, spiritual reality, whatever that may be, you can continue on physically, that's going to be mentally expanding, regardless of what's going out, either internal or external to you. And when it comes to physically expanding is moving into either a greater space, moving into a space that is expanded upon from your previous state, from your previous physical space that you're in. That could be moving space physically, that could be being in a more protected or in a more confident or a more surety rather than unsure energies or space when it comes to physically. And you could just be in the same space physically, yet you can bring this energy and this physical energy of expansion, of moving on from those energies. So I'm going to use, like I said last night, because this is how you learn. A lot of things that I teach on my channel about the mental, physical, and spiritual and mental and emotional states of being are from my experiences. I've developed and gained this spiritual knowledge, this spiritual wisdom out of my experiences. So I'm going to do as if I would always do, and I'm going to use my experiences in order to help teach and in order to help someone else understand and find their own ideas, find their own feelings, their own, let's say, situation or their own spiritual sense or spiritual perspective out of what I am teaching. So when it comes to what I was talking about last night, getting into astrology, regardless of mentally, like I said previously, how do I think that things went? How do I view my skill to be able to mentally break down astrology, to be able to mentally comprehend astrology, to be able to mentally get into talking about astrology? Regardless of that, regardless of the way that I'm viewing that when it comes to mentally, I'm physically, if that's something that I'm working towards and that's something that is my goal to expand towards, I'm going to continue on being in that space physically. Regardless of if mentally I think I can improve, which I know I can improve, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about expansioning and expanding in general. I know that I'm going to continue on putting myself in that space if that is something I need to work towards, if that's something that I'm going to work towards and I'm going to expand upon, regardless of what happens in the mental state of being. You know, even physically, regardless, like I said before, I'm going to continue on putting myself in that space and expanding on that if that's what I so desire to expand on, regardless of if, physically I see that what I'm talking about is being received, or let's say, not respected, but taken in by the physical realm, or just not accepted, right? None of that, but I'm going to continue on expanding when it comes to physically, regardless of if I see, like I said before, I'm talking about a new topic, I automatically think that physically I'm going to see my views jump up. That's not necessarily the truth. You have to constantly put in that work and not just need to see improvement, not just need and want to see the physical expansion right away. You're going to be able to view it as, okay, sure, I can look at it as this is going to be happening and that this is something that is possible, but regardless of what I see happening physically, I'm going to consistently keep putting myself in that space because I'm realizing that this is a place and a space that I can expand, that I can keep working on when it comes to physically. That's all I'm doing. I'm just talking about the states of being. I'm not doing anything other than talking about the states of being, teaching about the mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional states of being in order to continue on this path. You know, there's other things that I do, but those things are all extras. Those things are all part of what has to be done, part of sacrifices that have to happen, things that you have to deal with, things that you have to be involved in mentally, have to be involved with physically, have to be involved with emotionally, have to be involved with spiritually in order to get closer to that goal that you are expanding towards. You know, I'm going to continuously keep being in that space regardless of how I'm feeling about, how my emotional state of being is taking on me talking about astrology, me talking about something that is a new topic to me. If this is something I'm going to work towards, I'm going to constantly put myself in that space, regardless of how I feel, regardless of how that's making other people feel. And that's how you be real. That's how you be a real man or a real woman. You don't care about what's going on. What about the thoughts and the feelings of the physical state, or whatever attacks or judgment or whatever perspective or spiritual systems is being placed on you from others, regardless of what that is. you can continue on putting in that work. So continuing on expanding regardless of the emotional state of being, regardless of if, let's say, people that are in positions of power do not want me to be speaking about these things because they don't want me to be relating to other people in ways that they can now understand these things for themselves. They want to put a stop to that. They don't want me consciously awakening souls. They don't want me consciously awakening people's minds. They don't want me consciously ushering in, bringing in the spiritual and knowledge that is going to have an effect on expanding and have an effect on building and creating the physical world into what it needs to be in order for them to have less power, in order for us to have more power. So they could be looking at it like that. They could be sending these spiritual attacks, be sending the spiritual judgment upon thyself. Regardless of that, I'm going to continue on. I'm going to continue expanding physically. I'm not going to let anything like that stop me, because the physical expansion that I'm putting in and the physical work that I'm putting in is gearing me towards more onto my path of spirituality, more onto my purpose of spirituality, and I am reaching and I'm expanding on getting into more and new and more evolved, more wise, more knowledgeable spiritual planes of existence. So expanding, it's not an easy thing. You got to take in a lot of things into consideration and make sure that you're being real with yourself and real with your states of beings and real in general as a being in order to properly expand, in order to expand in a way that is more angelic, in a way that is not necessarily demonic towards oneself, in a way that is more uplifting than degrading towards oneself and or towards others. So expanding when it comes to, when I was talking about astrology last night, my video where I titled it The Alignments That We Were Experiencing, I am going to, so that we just touched on physically expanding. And I am using my example, like I said, because learning from the experiences, how to continue on putting in that work and how to continue on expanding, we're going to talk about emotionally. Emotionally, I am being protected by continuously putting in that work, regardless of any mental, let's say, thoughts that I had, of doubt, of regret, of shame, whatever that have been, because of, oh, people think this about astrology, people think that this is dumb, people think that this is for feminine energy or females or women, whatever, but that's childish shit. That's young, immature shit and thoughts about astrology. Because if you look at my post that I posted today, I said astrology is a spiritual system that can help one learn more about self and more about the reality that the self coexists within. And it's not about what you're using, it's about how you are using it. But in general, like I said, emotionally, I'm not dependent. I'm not emotionally burdened by the judgment of other people's thoughts on what I'm doing. I'm emotionally protected, and I'm emotionally growing on, emotionally expanding from caring about those mental states of beings, whether that be from internal, whether that be from external, whatever that may be. I'm emotionally stronger than that. I'm emotionally growing, I'm emotionally maturing, I'm emotionally expanding from giving any fucks about any of that stuff. And when it comes to that, you decide to not let these things burden your emotional state of being, not let these things have any control, any influence over your emotional state of being. And like I said, physically, anything that I'm going into, any person, place, or thing that I'm dealing with, any space that I'm moving into, if that's making me feel a certain way when it comes emotionally, I'm going to continue to expand. I'm going to continue to maintain strong regardless of what happens. Regardless of if I see someone coming into my space and physically casting stones, not necessarily like that, but I will be able to tell by using my senses, by using my intuition. I'm going to be able to tell how I'm being treated differently, how physically things around me in my physical state of being are being altered towards the work that I've been putting in, the expansion that I've been making, and therefore I'm going to be able to gear towards it. This is going to create more emotional strength, more emotional confidence, more emotional power and protection to care and care less about things that are going to be holding me back, regardless of what that may be. Emotionally, I'm not going to care about what I see when it comes to physically, because I'm growing beyond that and I'm expanding beyond that. Of course, I can take these things into consideration if it's going to help me learn something and learn how to do something better for the next time, or learn how I could have done something better. But guess what? We're not going to stay stuck on that. We're not going to stay dwelling on that, because we're going to continue on expanding. This is all about expanding. When it comes to emotionally, how I could sit here and I could say, I don't feel great about my performance, about comprehending the astrology. I don't feel exactly like I did what I said I could when that's in my title. I could feel like I'm selling someone short, or I'm selling the viewer short by not explaining the sun alignment, because I pretty much just talked on the moon alignment. But I'm realizing that that doesn't matter. Regardless of that, I did what I was supposed to do, and what I was supposed to do should not have any emotional judgment from others. I shouldn't even be so harsh when it comes to judging my performance or my ability to do so when it comes to emotionally. So having that emotional intelligence, having that emotional maturity, grow on past that and past those energies of worrying about any of that stuff, and continue growing on when it comes to emotionally. I'm gonna go for 13 more minutes. I know this is a lot of talking, but this ain't nothing. It's nothing for me. I'm an air sign. I'm an Aquarius. I can continue on talking because, hey, that's what I do. And I'm gonna continue on putting out that knowledge, putting on that intellectual facts, spitting out those intellectual facts, and spitting that good game to help people learn, to help people be inspired, to help motivate people, to help people understand, understand the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual states of being, because I'm putting in that real life work. They're going to realize this is real life stuff. This is real. This is not no phony, spirit, fake, woke, any type of thing like that. This is real. This is real life type stuff. This isn't no gimmick. This isn't no online BS. This is the real deal, the holy feel, and the holy grail. But guess what? When it comes to, let's say, spiritually, any spiritual attacks, any spiritual judgment, any spiritual, from any culture, from any religion, from any group of people, from any subculture, from any, let's say, limited hangout, whatever it may be, if I'm sensing that I'm getting the spiritual energy sent towards me, the spiritual energy of maybe attack, the spiritual energy of possible judgment, the spiritual energy of whatever that may be, I'm not gonna allow that to affect my emotional state of being. What I am gonna do is make sure that I am understanding, and understanding emotionally that's something that's making me strong. My emotional reaction to that is to initially take heed to that, not take heed in a way where I'm changing my actions or whatever to that, but I'm actually just seeing it for what it is, and taking it as this is going to benefit me, not something that's going to hinder me. So realizing that emotionally, that's just confirming. This is an emotional reaction that I can confirm either within me, an emotional reaction, or external to me, an emotional reaction to something that's going on when it comes to spiritually, when it comes to me expanding. I'm going to say, okay, that just confirms that I'm on the right path. All that does is that emotionally secures me in this fashion to consistently keep pushing on and to keep expanding when it comes to emotionally. And this is just an example when it comes to what I've experienced in my previous video, when it comes to talking about astrology, when it comes to venturing into something new, when it comes to expanding into new activities, new energies, new thought forms, new feelings, new spiritual systems, and new spiritual work and spiritual life path that I am on. So when it comes to moving on to spiritually expanding, and we're going to talk about, okay, spiritually expanding. This has to do with growing wiser, growing more knowledgeable as a spirit. This is gained mostly through the experiences that you go through, and developing the spiritual perspective, developing the spiritual knowing, developing a spiritual wisdom and knowledge through the actions that you go through. So for example, you could take the example that I've been talking about, how I was venturing into a new space. Spiritually, I'm growing. Spiritually, I'm expanding in a way of, like I've talked before, I'm trying to make this as non-repetitive as possible so that the viewer can try to understand, yes, I'm going through each state of being, and yes, I'm covering them in a very similar way, but the detail that I'm putting out towards it is just so that one can understand, so that one can help grasp what they can learn about this lesson on expanding, and taking myself and putting myself on, using myself as an example for people to learn this. And there we go. Sun went behind the cloud again, and that's perfect when it comes to spiritually. Of course, it's going to move back because it's not such a cloudy day, so the sun is back out. But it's funny because as an Aquarius, they say that in astrology, the sun has fallen in the sign of Aquarius. When you have the sun in Aquarius, you have let's say the inability to let's say act or act out specifically things when it comes to the sun, which comes to your actions. I've found that can just be a challenge. It's not that, oh, I solely can't act out because I'm an Aquarius sun. No, I've found that it's more of a challenge in order to do so. In order to do that, you're automatically going to expand. So it just goes to show that's a synchronicity. If I get off on a tangent, it is what it is, because at the end of the day, that's a teaching moment for each one. Teach one, and I just taught myself something. The sun is actually teaching me something, and I can correlate that, and I can use that as a synchronicity to continue on expanding, whether that be mentally, emotionally, physically, but particularly spiritually, and expanding when it comes to spiritually. But anyways, before I go on that tangent, we're going to cover spiritually expanding when it comes to my example of using astrology. And when it comes to, regardless of mentally, I can sit here and I'm not doubting myself mentally. I'm not having thoughts of regret. I'm not having thoughts of lacking or anything of that nature. What I can do, and what's real and what I actually resonate with, is that mentally I achieved that. Mentally, I did actually break down quite strongly, quite mentally in my strength. I broke down those alignments. But regardless of that, I don't have to rest on my laurels. I don't have to rest on my good accomplishments. I can realize that, okay, regardless of my mental state of being, regardless of what's going on with my mental state of being in terms of my spiritual expansion, I'm going to continue on spiritually expanding. I'm not going to let that stop me in my tracks from improving. I'm not going to let that stop me from my tracks of constantly becoming more and more in tune to, for this example, astrology, expanding into astrology, expanding to understanding and overstanding and comprehending and being able to teach and learn more about astrology when it comes to mentally. I'm not going to allow that mental state of being to outweigh that. Therefore, my mental state of being is always going to be fulfilled. It's always going to be constantly stimulated to expand, stimulated to grow, not stimulated to stay the same, not stimulated to stay stagnant, or whatever that may be, or docile, whatever words you want to use. I've used those words interchangeably. It's about time I found some new words to express that energy, but in time, that will happen. In time, I will constantly expand when it comes to mentally. And that's in due time. And that will happen, and I will see that occur. Like physically, that's something that I can see happening, something that I have saw happening from previously, from last night's video on talking about astrology. I'm going to continue on realizing that physically, I got to put in that work physically. I can't just sit and spiritually sit with my legs crossed or my legs in an Indian style, meditating and thinking that, I'm gonna get what I want, I'm gonna get what I need, everything's gonna come to me. No, I can't just sit there. I have to actually put in that work. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm spiritually just automatically gonna be spiritually having the edge in order to surpass physically putting in that work. No, you've got to put in that physical work. You've got to show God, you got to show the universe and spiritual predecessors that you mean real deal. You mean realness. You mean to put in that work when it comes to physically. You don't want to just sit with high hopes, sit with high spirits, hope and faith that everything's going to work out. You got to actually put in that work. So realizing that me putting in that work is not going to have me, putting in some work here and then stopping and pausing on the physical work, and pausing on the physical expansion, because realizing that physical expansion, that physical work that I'm putting in is going to help me to develop even more spiritual knowledge, develop even more spiritual perspective, even more spiritual essence, spiritual power, and spiritual perspective of the reality that we're in. So, not allowing the physical, the external, physical, internal, whatever that may be, to hinder, to affect you on your spiritual path, to affect you on your spiritual journey, to affect you carrying out your spiritual purpose. When it comes to emotionally, I'm not going to allow, I feel really off, I feel really odd, I feel pressure, I feel anxiety, I feel insecure, I feel this, I feel that. You know what? At the end of the day, you're always going to have thoughts, you're always going to have feelings, as long as you're experiencing the reality that we're experiencing. So why not use those in order to grow? Use those in order to expand when it comes to spiritually. I'm not going to sit here and be cowering away because of a certain way that I feel. I'm not going to sit here and be feeling, I'm way more superior than this. I'm way more superior than that. I'm way more superior than this person or that person. I'm only going to value what's real. And if something is superior when it comes to anything of that nature, then see it for what it is. Don't get all, on your high horse, on your soapbox, and all high in the ego, where you don't even constantly grow when it comes to spiritually. Don't get all emotionally, I'm better than everyone else, I can talk about astrology, I can do this, I can do that. At the end of the day, I'm realizing that whatever I feel about myself, I'm gonna always experience these feelings, I'm gonna always experience these thoughts, I'm gonna always experience, at least for now, in this vessel, this physical reality that we're in. So regardless of that, I'm going to keep expanding when it comes to spiritually. I'm going to keep on going when it comes to spiritually. And getting through that emotional expansion and expanding when it comes to emotionally is a big part in expanding when it comes to spiritually. I'm not going to sit and say, I didn't feel too good about that, I don't feel too good about this, blah, 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 blah. Guess what? At the end of the day, you gotta still expand when it comes to spiritually. You can't sit there and say, oh God, the universe, I didn't feel like doing this, I don't want to do that, I don't feel like I want to do that. Whatever that may be, you gotta suck it up and you gotta grow and you gotta continue on expanding when it comes to spiritually. And not even letting that stuff hinder you, not even letting that stuff stop you, but allowing it to help push you on, to help push you more towards your path of expanding. And when it comes to spiritually expanding or spiritually experiencing any roadblocks having to do with, there's other spirits that are more able to comprehend, or they have more knowledge or wisdom about astrology as of yet, and as of me on my path and my spiritual experience in dealings with astrology. So what? I'm living my own experience. I'm expanding in my own reality. And at the end of the day, sure, we can all come together to each one teach one and stuff of that nature. But I'm not going to say, oh, just because of that, just because other spirits are doing more with astrology, other spirits are more on point about astrology, I'm just going to give up. No, I'm going to realize that in my spiritual nature, I'm continuing on my path. I'm continuing expanding when it comes to spiritually, regardless of what I deal with, regardless of what happens in the mental state of being, regardless of what I'm experiencing physically, regardless of what I'm experiencing emotionally, and regardless of what happens and what I'm experiencing when it comes to spiritually. This was a video on expanding, and I used a example of my previous video that I used last night, and even just this video has helped me in order to expand. So for the viewer, I am putting this out there for you to be able to now expand, for you to be able to now expand in your own reality, for you to now be able to expand in your own mental state of being, your own physical state of being, your own mental state of being, and expand on your path and expand on your purpose in life when it comes to spiritually. I'll catch you in the next one.